What Ukraine has done now, it has taken probably in excess of 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity offline. And this is where they have turned the massive size of the Russian Federation against it, because Russia is such a vast country that they simply cannot defend all parts and where they have their oil refineries located. Hardly a night goes by that we're not hearing a report of another successful strike on an oil refinery. So this will be hurting Russia a lot.
Everything is focused at the moment on what's going on around Pokrovsk and the closing of the cauldron around that, and we're seeing a big ramp up in the information campaign coming out of the Russian bots saying that the Ukrainians are enclosed. They've been the forces have been asked to surrender. If they don't surrender, they will be destroyed completely. And then we're seeing exactly the opposite coming out of the Ukrainians, saying, yes, it's difficult, but we've still got our supply lines open. We're still maintaining our forces in there. Do you think? What are you reading and what are you hearing about what's going on the ground, and which bit of information, bit of the information war is accurate, or both trying to outdo each other?
Look, I've specifically been trying to work out what's going on in Pokrovsk for the last 8 hours. Since about 6:30 this morning, when I got a message in from one of my closest and most trusted Ukrainian friends who said Pokrovsk has fallen. And I asked him for sources. He said it was all across the Ukrainian media, but he had a problem getting back because he was under a power cut at the time. I then spoke to another friend of mine who you know, Sean Pinner. Hero of Mariupol.
And Sean's written a very good article describing what's recently gone on in Pokrovsk.
Yeah, let's come to that in a moment. But, my conversation with Sean at the moment was things are very, very difficult, but there is still a corridor being kept open. They are still getting supplies into the troops, and they're still rotating troops, and they're still rotating troops out. The Russians are certainly in parts of the city, and Sean tells me it's now street-to-street fighting, very much as it was in Mariupol, where, of course, Sean fought. To the bitter end. And, the article that you mention, Sean likens Pokrovsk to the farmhouse at Waterloo.
Yeah.
And, the Russians are taking it very, very slowly, but at the most enormous cost. And I've heard estimates, they have committed somewhere between 100 and 150,000 men to trying to take Pokrovsk. And they are losing between 700 and 800 men a day, either killed or seriously wounded. So clearly, if it was to finally fall, this would be taken as a morale boost and a propaganda victory for Putin to bring to his people before the end of the year. It would also, there is no doubting that it would be a morale blow for Ukraine. But I think it's more important. And, when I was speaking to Sean, he said something to me this morning. In fact, he said, here's a good soundbite for you. So I will credit Sean. And he said, in almost 4 years of the special military operation, we are only 2 months less than the Second World War, where Russia fought against the Nazis. And 2 months before the end of that war, Russia was already on the outskirts of Berlin. They have probably advanced 10 miles towards Pokrovsk in the last year, and at the most enormous cost. So Pokrovsk is bleeding Russia dry. It is buying, I believe, and certainly after speaking to Sean, and I think Mariupol did this as well, it's buying vital time for the Ukrainians elsewhere. But there's no, as I said, I've been trying to, I'd be very interested to know your opinion on it, but I've been really trying to work this out this morning. Very, very difficult, but I think there's a huge amount of disinformation out around there, which it's very hard to get clarity on it.
No, you're right. There is a huge amount of disinformation. And again, from what I'm seeing is there isn't a linear front line. So the Russians can say they've captured this building, and it looks as if it's in the middle of a few hundred extra meters of Ukrainian territory, but actually it means 4 or 5 men have got forward and put a little flag in the building. It doesn't mean that they've captured everything up to there. And the Ukrainians say, no, you haven't, because we're in this building, which is 150 meters into what's on someone's map as Russian territory, and that's what's causing the problem. We've now got a front line that is dotted with little pockets, and each side is on each other's side within the little pockets, and that's just the nature of where warfare is going. And when it comes to, from a military planning perspective and a military operational perspective, Pokrovsk for the Ukrainians is useful because it's fixed the Russians. It's fixed them psychologically, it's fixed them militarily, and the Russians have clearly decided, for whatever reason, they have to capture it. And it's face-saving. Whilst the Ukrainians can still fix the Russians in doing that and not then give them an advantage to start a manoeuvre elsewhere, they'll stay, provided the Ukrainian losses are manageable and they can continue with that. And that's what they did in Mariupol. That's what they did in Bakhmut. They're doing it now in Pokrovsk, and they will have decided where the next place is if they have to fall back and do that, because it's buying time. And the one thing Ukraine has got in the east, around in the Donbass, is space to trade for time, and they don't want to, because it means giving a bit of territory up, but only temporarily, and they'll do that, provided they make good use of that time. And they're making good use of that time to cause massive casualties to the Russians in the front line, but more importantly, to attack Russia's ability to continue to prosecute the war by attacking its ability to fund it, logistically supply it, manufacture more weapons and capability. And we're already seeing the Russian economy beginning to creak. And there are a few signs that Putin is getting slightly concerned about the effect it's having at home. And we're seeing that translating into Russia attacking Ukrainian power infrastructure because Ukraine is attacking Russian infrastructure. What do you make of the information that's coming out around those sorts of that level of warfare? So lifting up from the front line to this operational level.
I think very simply, Russia attacks Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure, while Ukraine is focusing very much on Russia's energy infrastructure, which makes, huge sense. Because the last time, and I haven't got up-to-date figures today, but the last time I looked at the figures about a week ago, despite the sanctions, Russia was still earning in the region of $20 billion a month from export of their oil. What Ukraine has done now, it has taken probably in excess of 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity offline. And this is where they have turned the massive size of the Russian Federation against it, because Russia is such a vast country that they simply cannot defend all parts and where they have their oil refineries located. Hardly a night goes by that we're not hearing a report of another successful strike on an oil refinery. So this will be hurting Russia a lot. It's over a month now since we heard that Russia was starting to import petrol. And I was looking at some of the economic figures. The IMF projections are down to Russia's economy to grow by somewhere in less than 1%, somewhere in the region of 0.7% next year. Obviously, Russia's own projections are significantly better than that, but we've just spent quite a bit of time talking about how Russia lies on an industrial basis. The question for me is, how long there has been discussion about when would the Russian economy fail. I don't think there is any question that sooner or later, if the pressure can be kept on, and if we in the West enable the Ukrainians to keep the pressure on, the Russian economy does not have endless resources. And I think there's a very, very smart policy or strategy at the moment to attack their economy, which is what feeds their war machine. Remember, Russia has been described as a gas station with nukes. Well, the gas station is running out of gas at the moment. and that has got to be causing them severe problems. But you know, the biggest problem for me, Philip, I was at a meeting last night. I run a charity in my local community, and one of the volunteers who works with me said, "Cormac, what's happening with Ukraine? We see nothing about Ukraine in the news at the moment, and it has all but disappeared from our news channels." And I've said many times before that this is probably the war in history where the information sphere is more important than any before it. And I'm afraid that Ukraine and the West, we are not winning that information war at the moment. That is what I very much fear.
Well, it's interesting. Yesterday, President Zelensky said that he accused Putin of seeking false victories through hybrid warfare and information. But you're right. It's critically important that we keep Ukraine in the headlines. And this is why it's a real pleasure talking to you on Frontline. And thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you, Philip. Always a pleasure.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.